World-changing development for Bitcoin. Jack Dorsey is doing something here that should silence all the critics and disproves all the naysayers who have been bashing Bitcoin, clearing the way for a $1 million Bitcoin price. Just as he predicted a long time ago, he said that Bitcoin could still fail if it doesn't establish itself as a means of payment. And now he's making a massive development here that makes exactly that possible, even without the internet. And people have always said, yeah, if the internet goes down and so on, then Bitcoin won't work anymore. That has now been definitively disproven. And today I'll show you why, and why this will push Bitcoin up to at least $1 million US, and how Jack Dorsey is truly setting a new standard here. On top of that, we're seeing massive movements in Russia. There's also a lot happening here. At Sberbank, there are now massive developments that we also need to take a look at. But first, smash that like button below for higher Bitcoin prices, for new all-time highs, for the epic Valhalla bang. And for those of you who haven't heard, I've mentioned it several times before. Jack Dorsey is a major Bitcoin bull. Some even think he might be Satoshi Nakamoto, because he's just been around for such a long time. He's a billionaire, and much more. A cyberpunk. Some have criticized him for his past. But what he's doing now is absolutely world-changing. And he's always been outspoken with his criticism. Yes, Bitcoin can be destroyed if it doesn't establish itself as a means of payment. At the same time, though, he was ultra bullish, saying Bitcoin will go to $1 million. He says here that Bitcoin won't reform the dollar, but will actually replace it. That means he assumes that with Bitcoin, we'll have a completely new monetary system, and the dollar won't coexist in the long run, but will definitely be eroded and replaced by Bitcoin. Bitcoin will replace the dollar, and we'll take a closer look in a moment at everything Jack Dorsey is saying here, or rather, what he's developed and what's new about it. But first, just very briefly, this was also really, really exciting. In Russia, the state-owned Sberbank, worth $700 billion, has just announced that it will offer Bitcoin crypto custody services. Let's go! And this is the bank that's already running tests here, apparently with bid bonds. There was also a report that they didn't call them bid bonds, but that they're doing bond-backed Bitcoin projects, or rather, Bitcoin-backed bond projects. That's the right way to put it. I found that interesting, but it's really just a little side note here. What's much more exciting here is what Jack Dorsey is saying. Bitcoin will be at $1 million by 2030. And now check this out. Jack Dorsey just launched an app, Bitcoin without the internet. So you can send Bitcoin here without needing the internet. That's huge. And let's take a quick look at how this works. Here you can see, this is probably where you enter the amount, how much Bitcoin you want to send. Of course, it's not super user-friendly yet. It doesn't really look like it's super user-friendly at the moment. It's called BitChat here. And now over here, about 1,300 something Satoshis have arrived. 1,337 Satoshis have arrived. And yeah, back in the day, and back then, the main criticism was always, yeah, Bitcoin, if the internet goes down and stuff, then it doesn't work anymore. And of course, not everyone is going to have BitChat and so on ready to go right away. And obviously, these are just short distances where you can send Bitcoin over Bluetooth. But at least this is already one way to stay operational here. And I honestly find that pretty wild. And with Jack Dorsey, we can also see that he basically wants to promote Bitcoin as a means of payment. That's always a big criticism I see as well. Like, yeah, now everyone just uses Bitcoin for hodling and so on. And Michael Saylor says, never spend your Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. I'm also a fan of the idea of never selling your Bitcoin. But if you simply use it here as a means of payment, then in my opinion, that's absolutely legitimate. You can always buy back the Bitcoin, but we just have to understand that using Bitcoin as a means of payment is a consequence of us implementing Bitcoin here as a store of value. That means, for example, when people criticize and say, yeah, but Bitcoin isn't a means of payment, you can't actually use it to pay for anything, and so on. That's simply the consequence that follows when Bitcoin establishes itself as a store of value. People will also use it as a means of payment once the market capitalization is large enough and everyone has enough Bitcoin. That means, at the moment, people also don't necessarily use Bitcoin for payments, simply because they still have far too little Bitcoin. If it simply becomes the standard that people have 90%, 100%, or 80% of their portfolio in Bitcoin, then of course it's obvious that you have to spend Bitcoin now, whether it's to buy melons or, I don't know, nettles or some garden tools back there or something like that. You can then only buy those things with Bitcoin, because there just won't be any dollars anymore. That's what Jack Dorsey is saying as well. The dollar will eventually become obsolete in the long run. And that's just a really, really good business thing, which gives the Bitcoin network even more resilience. Someone here also makes a very, very interesting comment about Jack Dorsey's reinvention. I really don't understand Jack Dorsey here. He literally had no problem with the government censoring free speech on the very website he created. But now the guy seems to be extremely pro-freedom when it comes to Bitcoin. His BitChat project is truly incredible. The ability to send Bitcoin directly from paper to paper without an internet connection is, in my opinion, revolutionary. I'm really confused about what to make of this guy. And here Daniel Batten adds, it's called growing up or becoming an adult. Look at the pivot Michael Saylor made with Bitcoin. You really shouldn't judge people too early here. There are truly massive pivots happening in the Bitcoin space. We've seen it so many times already that so much changes here that people just start thinking in completely new ways, completely open up, grow spiritually, grow as humans, and much more. Bitcoin is the transformation here, the transformation of our consciousness as individuals, but also here as a collective. And that's why you definitely shouldn't hold grudges here as soon as someone opens up to Bitcoin. And for those who don't know, Jack Dorsey was a co-founder of Twitter and then handed it over to Elon Musk, and some accused him of censorship. Now he's working at Block. We also have a very, very interesting take here. This is Jack Dorsey on Joe Rogan, and let's take a quick look at why he says that if you don't adopt Bitcoin here, if you simply ignore Bitcoin, then you'll be irrelevant in the future.
Have something like the Cash App, which is it's very much a disruptive technology in terms of like decentralization of banks and currency.
You can pay with Bitcoin everywhere here. That's also what Jack Dorsey set up. So he's really going all out on adoption right now. The only thing he's missing here is that he doesn't have a Bitcoin treasury strategy in place at Block, which some people have criticized him for. They say he doesn't have enough Bitcoin here. He still needs to buy a lot more Bitcoin. But of course, if he is Satoshi Nakamoto, then he has enough Bitcoin. But that's just speculation. I don't think he's Satoshi Nakamoto, but some people actually believe that.
And, to have it where everything is going right at you're direct depositing a paycheck right in the app if you so choose. And then you could also buy Bitcoin, which is another disruptive technology. I mean, this is another step towards this sort of new way of doing things. And is there pushback from any companies, or is there? Oh yeah, I mean.
So first of all, how awesome would it be to have an app where you can buy Bitcoin, send Bitcoin, do this and that, and this IndieVision thing? I'm not sure how old it is. It's probably already a year or two old, or maybe even older. I really don't know. He definitely says it would be awesome if you could do all that here. There's this app, Jack Dorsey, which is exactly that app where you can buy and send here. I think you can also buy there, so it should be possible. There are also other apps where that's possible.
Like you just look at like some of the major banks and their consideration around Bitcoin. They all love blockchain because of the efficiencies it can create for their business and potentially new business lines. But I think there is.
Explain blockchain for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Blockchain is a distributed ledger, and what that means is that it's basically a distributed database where the source of truth can be verified at any point around the network, and you can see this annotation around how content or how around money traveled.
So it's very, very exciting. First of all, it's about the fact that banks have been cautious here, especially when it comes to Bitcoin. Of course, they like blockchain, but not Bitcoin. That's always the thing. Bitcoiners see it exactly the other way around. They say Bitcoin, not blockchain, and the banks say blockchain, not Bitcoin, and now the banks are slowly starting to open up to Bitcoin as well. And he also says here, when you break it down, blockchain is nothing more than a decentralized ledger. We have centralized ledgers, managed by the central bank, keeping track of who has money and who sends money. There's a ledger. It's managed centrally by the central bank or by some other big bank. And with Bitcoin, the whole thing is decentralized. And now come the relevant statements. Attention.
You don't have to go to an institution. So the records.
Yeah, there's no centralized check. There's not centralized control over it. And I think that is threatening. It's certainly threatening to certain services behind banks and financial institutions.
Because with Bitcoin, there simply aren't any central points of attack. You can't just stop it. You can't just censor it. There is no central authority that has control over Bitcoin. And that's why a lot of players are afraid of Bitcoin. Those are really, really good points. But now people are finally getting it. And like I said, this interview is already a year or two old, or maybe even older. I don't know. Now people are realizing, damn, we're afraid of it. We actually want to fight it, but we can't stop it. So we still have to participate.
Threatening some governments as well.
Selbst die Staaten haben Angst davor.
Just look at this and how do we embrace this technology, not react to it in more from a threat standpoint, but what does it enable us to do, and where does our value shift? And that's what we should be talking about right now, is like how our value shifts. And there's always really.
And that's crazy. Back then, he was already saying he was thinking about how to deal with this problem, that the central authorities want to keep their power. And then he just drops this app, which I think is even free and open source, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if it's open source. Let me know in the comments below. Now they're just dropping such a massive app out of nowhere. I haven't tried it out myself yet. Let me know in the comments below if you've already tried it out, because this really strengthens Bitcoin's resilience, its decentralization, its censorship resistance, and its independence, even more so now, since theoretically it's possible even without the internet. And it's honestly pretty wild that he's not just talking about it, but actually following through and executing.
Strong answers to that question, but if you're not willing to ask the question in the first place, you will become irrelevant because technology will just continue to march on.
So you heard it. Anyone who doesn't get on board with Bitcoin here is going to become irrelevant. Anyone who doesn't keep up with the technology, and so on. And that's just so crazy. And that's not just the case with Bitcoin. It's also true for AI and so on. Those are basically the two killer technologies we have right now. And anyone who just doesn't keep up. I've said this so many times. We're living in an exponential era right now. So much is happening. And what's going to happen in the next 5 years will be more intense than what happened in the last 50 or even 100 years. And people who are just standing on the sidelines now, who aren't getting involved, they're going to wake up one day and feel like dinosaurs. They're going to think, damn, are we still stuck in the Stone Age or something? While everyone else is already way ahead with Bitcoin, with AI and so on, sending value across space and time at zero cost, and not even over the internet.
And make you irrelevant. And it's the people that like are growing up with this technology, are born with the technology, only knowing that technology, or are asking the tough questions of themselves that are going to be super disruptive to their business, and they're thinking about it right now, and they're taking actions. And
so you heard it. This whole thing is going to be super disruptive, and of course, it's going to improve everyone's lives, yours, companies. Earlier, someone made a good comment because last time I said Bitcoin is for companies, for states, for everyone, for individuals, for people, for legal entities, for animals, and so on. He then commented below like, hey, aren't you making it too complicated? After all, we're all just people, and Bitcoin is for everyone, and that really is a good, I'd say, perspective, because when you break it down, a state is just a whole bunch of people, or rather, the state is really just a mental construct, something that doesn't actually exist. There are basically only people, and in the same way, there's really no such thing as a company either. That's just a mental construct too. In reality, there are only people, and we humans have just created these mental constructs that we agree on. A state, a company, and so on. But if we break it down, we're all people, we're all one, we're one big human family. We all share the idea of bringing more harmony into the world. The only problem is, fiat sets the incentives so that we end up bashing each other's heads in, because we just don't have a solid foundation. We're building an economy on a bad foundation, and that's different with Bitcoin. Now we have an economy that we're building on a solid foundation. Sound money, sound world. And that's the important message you always need to keep in mind. Because Bitcoin is so much more than just some kind of magic internet money. Bitcoin is the tool that brings us back into unity, that lets us see through the illusions again. Of you, me, him, heard it, companies, states, this, that, whatever. That's all bullshit. It's all just a mindfuck. And so, if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin. There you can buy Bitcoin easily, securely, and simply. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Definitely check it out, folks. See you. Until then, peace out.